Shalom, welcome. This is TV7's Editor's Note. I'm Jonathan Hassan, and in today's edition, we're going to have an in-depth discussion on the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region. Much happened over the course of the past week alone, and of course, on the geostrategic level. What is the situation between the United States and its main geostrategic rival in the age of power competition, namely China, albeit the secondary actor, Russia is at play, of course. The situation in Europe, where we are seeing a rise of Islamists/jihadists' aggressive behavior, malign behavior against the authorities themselves, some of which have even announced that they have lost the monopoly on violence, something that should be very alarming, not only in Europe, but also in the United States and also here in Israel. And to deliberate all of that, I am more than pleased to welcome my dear friend, colleague, a mentor, if I may, Dr. Rafael Bardaji, who formerly served as Spain's National Security Advisor, currently the CEO of Worldwide Strategy. It's truly a pleasure to have you with me here, Rafael.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure, really.
Absolutely. Well, in the last week, most dramatic event that occurred was, in sorts, the targeted elimination of a Hamas gathering in the Qatari capital of Doha. We are, of course, all the time learning more about the circumstances of the event and the challenges that it presents. There are, of course, speculations still on a number of those leaders that were there. But what came to your mind, and what was the strategic outcome that Israel was looking to achieve in this context?
Well, I think there is a clear message, is the political echelon and leadership of Hamas that has been protected by Qatar and away from Gaza, spending their lives in luxury, were not immune. And the fact that they were not in the street, but in Qatar, made many people think that they were untouchable. And I think that's the main strategic message from the Israeli government and the IDF. If you're a terrorist, you don't have any safe place to hide. Even if it's Qatar. Many people have misunderstood the action. I think the Prime Minister in the UK, Starmer, said that Israel attacked a neutral country. Well, actually, the Geneva Convention established that for a neutral country to be considered as such, cannot hide or host any planning capability of the enemy. And obviously, the Hamas leadership has been ramping freely in Qatar. So the Qatar supposed to be neutrality has been violated by the same regime. So I think from the legal perspective, the action was totally legal for the Israelis to hit Hamas political leadership. And from the strategic perspective, I think is what needed to be done. It is impossible to declare victory over Hamas if you have only eliminated the Hamas part in the Gaza Strip. You need also to deal with the political messaging and leadership, so they cannot say, we won. If you effectively eliminated that capability, you are getting closer, first, to a potential deal over the hostages, because you are weakening dramatically the organization. But secondly, and more importantly, probably, to the end of the war. You will be able to declare victory because nobody in front of you will have the ability to put in front a narrative saying, no, we are still here, we're winning this war. No? I think that's the main strategic lesson that has to be learned from this action.
Well, we all remember, or I hope at least some of us remember, on the horrendous day of October 7th, that Saturday of 2023, when the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates launched their brutal massacre of Israelis in southern Israel to include 1,200 mostly civilians. Among them were 33 American nationals. We're talking about 12 Americans who were also kidnapped by Hamas and its terror affiliates into the Gaza Strip. Two of those Americans who are, of course, unfortunately, not among the living. They have already been murdered by Hamas. Nonetheless, their bodies are still being kept in Gaza to date. We remember the images on the Qatari television station network, Al Jazeera, where the leaders of Hamas were praising Allah in their hotel room in Doha, Qatar, and saying that this was a great victory against Israel and the West. Why are everybody shocked about this activity now?
Well, I think, the problem with the Hamas terrorism is that has been very clever on the narrative front. And many in the Western world outside Israel has bought the propaganda machine put in place by Hamas, no? The famine, the genocide accusation, all these kind of things that can be considered from an analytical perspective very stupid, but they are, in the wild out, and many people has bought such an arguments. That's I think people tend to forget that first there are still hostages in the hands of Hamas. If they want to end the war, the main question will be for Hamas to release all the hostages and the remains of the people who were, as you said, abducted violently, terrible in that day. But we prefer probably to look to the other direction and apply the double standard that is always applied to Israel in that kind of situations. But again, I think we need to remember the people that this war happened not because Israel wanted to start a war, but because it was started by Hamas. No?
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Bardaji, when we're looking on the geostrategic playing field, the Islamist Hamas is naturally not on its own. It is fighting a war against Israel. It seems to hate Israel more than life itself, and it is continuing to fight despite all objective data indicating that they're not going to win this. Israel is winning this war. It is preparing for the so-called Operation Gideon's Chariots 2. It is already actually engaged in this operation quite ferociously, with gradually intensifying its activities while the Gazan population is moving southward into the southern part of the Palestinian enclave there. But within this context, is it just Qatari backing and Turkish backing, or does this also draw deeper into strategic power competition, where China views this event as an option to smear the United States, to weaken its so-called composition of alliances as it operates within context of Western operational proceedings, and utilize this opportunity to really weaken the West?
Well, nothing in this world, unfortunately, can escape the dynamics between the rivalry between superpowers nowadays, America, China, and then Russia and allies. But I have to say, I think, in my own opinion, that this war started because of a regional confrontation. Iran has been putting in place a ring of fire around Israel for decades, and I think they consider that was the time, with all the divisions and potential apparent weakness from the perspective of the Israeli government, it was the time to really start trying to eliminate Israel and erase it from the map as they wanted. I think people misunderstood the reaction of Israel, the resilience of the Israeli society, and the clarity of the goals set by the political and military leadership. Unfortunately, I think in the Western world, and also in part of the leadership of the IDF, the concept of military victory has been abandoned years ago. And from October 8th, they say that this war cannot be won, which is untrue, it's false. This war, as any war, when you commit yourself to victory, can be won. And what the Israeli government is proving is that victory is possible. Look at the map today. There is no Hezbollah as an existential threat anymore to Israel. There is no Iranian nuclear program threatening directly the existence of Israel. The Syrian regime has changed and is full of potential to be realized and materialized yet, but there's a change there. The militias in Iraq are not automatically following orders from Tehran anymore. Tehran also only has the Houthis in Yemen, but that's all what they have. They don't have even the ability to retaliate against Israel anymore. No? So I think the map has been redrawn by Israeli military and political views and the strategic orientation. Now has to finish the war that is just limited to the Gaza Strip and Hamas. No? And I think it's the time. No? You've eliminated most of the political leadership in Qatar. You have eliminated most of the military capabilities from Hamas. Now is the time to go for the third goal of the government, which is to remove Hamas from any controlling or governing body in Gaza. Yes, it is a problem. You have to think about the day after the war. You have to think about alternative ways to govern the Strip, but I think that's plausible with the Arab helps, with the United States backing, can be done.
Well, strategic achievements are not a one-stop shop. It's a continuous reality. It's very fluid at times. And in order to solidify strategic achievements, the tactical gains from the Gaza Strip and across the region, from Lebanon to Syria to even Iraq and Yemen, as you mentioned, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, Israel needs to continue to think outside of the box and to operate in close concert with the United States of America and its other allies, also in Europe, despite the rhetoric emanating out of European capitals these days, which is really horrendous in every mind of any practitioner looking at this situation objectively. And at the same time, also, what we're seeing in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere is also quite disheartening, to say the least. But from your perspective, when we look at the current challenges in Europe, a continent that is faced with a growing tide of illegal migration, predominantly by Islamists from Muslim countries entering into the country, and having those young people at military age, many of them, going to local mosques and being indoctrinated not to integrate into Western civilization, but rather to take over Western civilization. And that has been quite open in public source these days. And just over the last 48 hours, we saw another video by jihadis in France calling on the French authorities to release their jihadi brother who was incarcerated for murdering 3 French citizens. And their prerequisite or their threat is, unless you release him, we'll burn down the Notre Dame church once again. What are we to make out of that?
Well, look, I think the European social contract, as we have been living for decades since the creation of the European Union, was for the people in Europe to enjoy prosperity, to enjoy security from external threat, and to enjoy safety in their day-to-day life. All of 3 portfolios has evaporated in the last years. Prosperity since the financial crisis is not anymore there. Governments like in Germany are saying now that the welfare state that we knew is unsustainable, which it is. Defense, it is clear that it was only possible in a peaceful continent to enjoy by the Europeans. Once the Russian invaded Ukraine, the extreme dependence of the security guarantee of the United States has emerged again, not in a theoretical way, but in a practical one. And Europe is totally incapable of bringing a solution to the Ukrainian war, or even to guarantee our own security, despite the billion that the European Union has announced. This is not true. We are still dependent on the United States security guarantees, whether we like it or not. And on the safety on the streets, the mass migration, uncontrolled and illegal immigration by millions in Europe, and the expansion of the second and third generation of Muslim immigrants in our continent is changing the social face of our societies. There is no day in Europe that there is no knife attack, that there is no sexual crime committed by an illegal or Muslim immigrants against European women. And I think people are reaching a point where they are saying enough is enough. If our governments cannot guarantee our own assistance, we need to look for alternatives. And you see how different forces are emerging in more powerful ways because of these dilemmas. No? But unfortunately, today, the president of the European Union is going to deliver the speech about the State of the Union, which is a state of crisis, lack of identity, lack of vigor, lack of courage, and humiliation at the end of the day. And that's why I think the continent is in a very dire situation. Many leaders wanted to fight at two wars front, one against America of Trump, one against the Russia of Putin, and we are in a state where we are going to lose both.
Well, it's not too late. We do see a clear trajectory of many Europeans whose eyes have been opened in light of the devastating situation in the various streets of the European cities and states, moving to the conservative parties, to the right of center party, so to speak, and calling for change before it's too late, which obviously is triggering the more Marxists, radical left elements within various European elites and countries to make a unholy matrimony, so to speak, with Islamist elements. And we're seeing this also impacting their foreign policy. One of those countries is, of course, Spain, where we're seeing the Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, coming out and announcing that they will boycott support for Israel and are passing all kind of atrocious legislation against Israel. Now, this is, of course, a country, and I'm sorry that I'm saying it this way, but I know the dire situation of Spain these days. It's a country that spends more on illegal migration than its own defense budget. That is staggering.
Right. Yes, we spend more in sustaining the illegal immigrants by 10 times the budget of defense, actually. But anyway, the problem is that the left in Europe has become more radicalized, closer to the communist than to the social democracy that they were born in. In Spain, our prime minister is a cocktail of Nicolás Maduro and the leader of North Korea. I'm afraid that that's the problem we have in this particular moment in history. But let me remind that the problem of Europe has not been created only by the left. The open doors policy was created essentially and sustained by Angela Merkel, for instance. So the Conservative Party, the traditional Conservative parties, are as responsible of the situation we have today as the Social Democrats from the left. That's why many new radical parties from the right are emerging. Alternative for Germany, Fratelli in Italy, Vox in Spain. Le Pen has been always in France. We have Nigel Farage now in the UK, rising star. It's because people is frustrated. People know that there is a kind of framework that keep united the Social Democrats from the left and the Social Democrats of the conservative parties. And those that have promised our prosperity, security, and safety cannot deliver because they are part of the problem. Whether the Europeans realize that and move to a different kind of political establishment is an open question, but we have to see. There are many elections coming in Europe, and I can foresee that there will be some changes in new governments.
Well, God willing, change is required in Europe for European civilization to sustain, which is founded upon the Judeo-Christian values and biblical principles that we so ardently support and back. But when we're talking right now on America, to what degree, following the successful block of the influx of migration that occurred during the Biden administration, to really alter that balance that ultimately did impact foreign policy, even in the United States, very similar to what we're seeing in Europe? And how can America help Europe salvage itself considering the importance of America sustaining its coalition, sustaining its allies in order to remain the dominant force globally?
Well, I would say that the best gift America can give to the Europeans is not sustaining our military capabilities and everything as in the past, but to win the cultural wars that Trump is willing to fight back against the woke mentality and against the left mentality in the United States. I think during the Obama and Biden, we saw an America that has lost his identity, or her identity, sorry, that were in the hands of a bunch of radical people that were erasing the American history, trying to kill the American values, and trying to confuse the pillars of what America was for Americans and for the rest of the world. And I think President Trump is a gift from God in that sense, that he's pushing back all this kind of radical American agenda, and that could be the best, because that will open many debates that in Europe are censored today. We are living in Europe in a kind of 1885 framework of mind, where the European Union is able to censor and put in jail people just for expressing an opinion in X or in any other platform. And that's very risky for the freedom and for the rest of the world. No? I think Vice President Vance said it very clearly months ago in a Munich conference. Europe has abandoned or is abandoning or losing the essential principle of a democracy. And if America can restore the same principle of a democracy for Americans, I think that will have a ripple effect in Europe and will open up many debates that are now impossible to sustain.
Well, beyond that, and I completely agree with what you said, but beyond that, I think that America and Europe need to win the war in the education systems because it starts there. And the next generations are the most important generations, which need to ultimately stand up and lead those countries at some point. Unfortunately, many have not learned how to study, but rather they are confined to a certain narrative, which limits the horizon of many of those individuals, which is really something that we want to see change. But let's draw back to this area here in the Middle East, since Israel is dealing with a multi-front war. We still deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran that is not shying away from its continued aspirations to attain weapons of mass destruction, to rehabilitate its proxies after the devastation that it's sustained in the war of those past 2 years, roughly. In 3 minutes, which is roughly what we have left for today's edition, what should Israel do and how should it manage the challenges that it faces currently in a very tough climate on a global stage?
Well, first of all, I think we need to remind both actions against the political leadership of the Houthis in Yemen and the political leadership of Hamas in Qatar. That's also a message for the Iranian leadership: say, we are not safe. Don't think we are not able and willing to hit the political leadership because it's just political. Second, I think we need to remind the people that the strike against the nuclear program, essentially by Israel, but at the end joined by the American forces, was quite successful, despite what has been on the public debate. And that has put back years any nuclear threat to Israel and the region and the world. There are still some elements of concern, like the potential developments of new ballistic missiles by Iran. But I think with the situation of the good intelligence that America and Israeli has on Tehran today, and with some actions, that cycle can be also counter-reacted, and the prevalence of the Western world and Israel over Iran, if it's not guaranteed, it can be obtained with the right efforts and the right focus of attention. So I wouldn't be surprised that there is no counter-reaction of Iran against Israel in the coming months. There may be some terrorist attempts here and there in the world, but it's much more limited. And I think what we consider to be an existential threat from Iran now is not there anymore. No? It could happen in the future, but not very soon.
Indeed. Well, we still have a brief minute, and on that, since Iran is one enemy, but there are other rivals lurking about in Israel's immediate neighborhood, third circle, so to speak, neighborhood. What are the additional threats that Israel should focus on? If you may answer that briefly, please.
Well, I think there is a potential confrontation here between Israel and a power that want to play a bigger role, which is Turkey, the Turkey of Erdogan. But again, this is more strategic and political than a military threat today, though Israel has to be vigilant of the advances of Istanbul in Syria. But I think that can be managed for the time being, no, without the need to revert to a show of forces between the two contenders. But yes, there is a problem there.
Well, when we're talking about Turkey, obviously it is a member of the North Atlantic Alliance organization, namely an ally of both Europe and the United States, even though in its foreign policy it does not always align itself with either camp. We will have to discuss it more in depth in future editions. Dr. Rafael Bardaji, it's truly always a pleasure to listen to your insights.
Thank you very much for having me again. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. Well, I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. This has been our latest of TV7's Editor's Note. I'm Jonathan Hassan from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
Shalom, I'm Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy foreign minister and member of Knesset. Today, I'm very privileged to be hosting TV7's Middle East Review and also being a panelist of the various shows of TV7, which I find the most enlightening, most educating if you really want to understand the world, the global scene as well as the regional scene of the Middle East. It is worthwhile to watch TV7.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.